Lydia, how could Stephen do this to us? He's gambled away our savings. Esther's voice cracked with shock as she waved the bank statement in front of my face. I stared at the numbers, unable to comprehend the depth of my husband's betrayal. Our hard-earned retirement fund, the nest egg we'd carefully built over decades of sacrifice, had vanished into the abyss of his addiction. Esther's accusatory glare bore into me, as if I were somehow responsible for her son's reckless behavior. I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. I had no idea, I stammered, my hands trembling. He never told me anything. Esther scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer. Of course he didn't. You're too busy with your little hobbies to notice what's happening in your own home. Her words stung, but I knew better than to engage in her toxic games. Stephen had always been her golden child, capable of no wrong in her eyes. As if on cue, my husband shuffled into the kitchen, his eyes downcast and his shoulders slumped. He reeked of stale cigarettes and cheap whiskey, a far cry from the sharp-dressed professional he once was. Mom, Lydia? I'm sorry, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. I got in too deep and I couldn't stop. Esther rounded on him, her fury palpable. You foolish boy, how could you do this to your family? Your wife and children deserve better than a deadbeat gambler. Stephen flinched, shrinking under his mother's wrath. I wanted to defend him, to remind Esther that he was a grown man, not the little boy she still saw him as, but the words died on my lips, choked by the weight of his betrayal. In that moment, I realized the true gravity of our situation. With our savings gone, we would be forced to rely on Esther's meager pension and my modest retirement income. The comfortable life we had built for ourselves was crumbling before our eyes. Esther turned to me, her eyes narrowed. You'll have to take me in, Lydia. I can't afford to live on my own anymore. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words never came. What choice did I have? Stephen had squandered our financial security, and his mother was now our responsibility. As I nodded my reluctant agreement, I couldn't help but feel the invisible chains of obligation tightening around me. Our once peaceful suburban home was about to become a battleground, and I feared I was ill-equipped for the war that lay ahead. Lydia, this food is awful. You never had any sense of taste, Esther complained, pushing the plate away with a look of disgust. I bit my tongue, fighting back the urge to defend my cooking. It was a losing battle, one I'd learned long ago not to engage in. Esther had always been critical, her sharp tongue a weapon she wielded with precision. Stephen, as usual, remained silent, his eyes fixed on his plate as he mechanically shoveled food into his mouth. He had long since given up trying to mediate the constant tension between his mother and me. Adam and Leah exchanged uncomfortable glances, caught in the crossfire of our dysfunctional family dynamic. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing that their childhood memories were tainted by scenes like this, played out over and over again. Grandma, the food is delicious, Leah offered, her voice gentle but strained. Mom worked hard on this meal, Esther scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. You're too kind, dear. Your mother has never been much of a cook. Adam shifted in his seat, his brow furrowed. Mom, maybe you should listen to Grandma's advice. She knows what she's talking about. I felt the familiar sting of his words, a reminder that even my own son had been swayed by Esther's manipulative ways. She had a knack for turning family members against one another, sowing seeds of doubt and discontent. As the meal dragged on, the tension in the air grew thicker, suffocating me with each passing minute. I longed for the days when our family gatherings had been filled with laughter and warmth, before Esther's presence had cast a dark shadow over our home. After what felt like an eternity, the dishes were cleared, and Esther retreated to her room, leaving a trail of criticism in her wake. Stephen, as always, followed dutifully, his loyalty to his mother unwavering. I sank onto the couch, exhausted by the constant battle to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Adam and Leah hovered nearby, their expressions a mix of pity and frustration. Mom, you shouldn't let her get to you like that, Leah said softly, taking a seat beside me. Grandma is just, well, you know how she is. I forced a smile, but it felt hollow. I know, dear. It's just, sometimes it feels like she's slowly chipping away at me, piece by piece. Adam shook his head, his jaw set in a familiar stubborn line. You're too sensitive, Mom. Grandma's just trying to help in her own way. I wanted to argue, to make him see the truth about Esther's manipulative behavior, but I knew it would be futile. He was too deeply entrenched in her web of lies and deceit. As I watched my children leave, each carrying their own burdens of family drama, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hopelessness. Esther's grip on our lives seemed unbreakable, and I feared that the fractures within our family would only continue to widen. "Mom, you've always been so stubborn. You should listen to Grandma," Adam lectured me coldly, his arms folded across his chest. I felt a familiar pang in my heart as my own son sided with Esther, his grandmother's poisonous words seeping into his mind like a slow-acting venom. It was a scene that had played out countless times, but the sting never dulled. Beside him, Rebecca nodded in agreement, her lips curved into a smug smile. She had quickly become Esther's ally, feeding into the toxic dynamic that had taken root in our home. "Adam, please," I pleaded, my voice strained. "Can't you see what she's doing? She's trying to turn us against each other." He scoffed, shaking his head dismissively. "You're just being paranoid, Mom. Grandma only wants what's best for us." I wanted to scream, to shake him until he saw the truth, but I knew it would be futile. Esther had sunk her claws into him long ago, and her grip was unrelenting. Stephen, as always, remained silent, his eyes downcast as he retreated to the shadows of our crumbling marriage. He had long since abdicated his role as a husband and father, content to let Esther dictate the course of our lives. Leah, my sweet, sensitive daughter, watched the exchange with a pained expression. She had always been caught in the crossfire, torn between her loyalty to her family and her desire for peace. "Mom, Dad, please," she implored, her voice trembling. "Can't we just get along? Tom and I are getting married soon, and I don't want this drama to overshadow our special day." I felt a surge of guilt, knowing that my daughter's happiness was being tainted by the toxic environment we had created. She deserved better, a loving family to support her as she embarked on this new chapter of her life. But Esther was having none of it. "Don't be ridiculous, Leah," she snapped. "Your mother is the one causing all the problems. If she would just listen to me, everything would be fine." I clenched my fists, biting back the retort that burned on my tongue. Esther thrived on conflict, reveling in the chaos she sowed within our family. As the argument escalated, I felt myself retreating inward, a protective shell forming around my battered heart. I had always prided myself on being a strong, capable woman, but Esther's relentless attacks had slowly chipped away at my confidence, leaving me doubting my worth as a wife and mother. In that moment, a seed of defiance took root within me. I couldn't continue living like this, trapped in a cycle of toxicity and abuse. Something had to change, and I knew it would have to start with me. As my family dispersed, each retreating to their respective corners, I made a silent vow. I would find a way to regain control of my life, to break free from Esther's suffocating grip. It was a daunting task, but I was determined to succeed, no matter the cost. "Lydia, why are you working? Are you up to something no good?" Rebecca asked, her voice dripping with false concern as she leaned against the kitchen counter. I fought back the urge to roll my eyes, knowing that any reaction would only fuel her twisted games. Esther's influence had seeped into her like a poisonous venom, turning my once pleasant daughter-in-law into a master of subtle manipulation. "I'm just trying to keep busy," I replied, forcing a tight smile. "It gets a little lonely around here during the day." Rebecca's lips curved into a sickly sweet smile, her eyes glinting with malice. "Well, we wouldn't want you getting into any trouble, would we? A woman your age, working with all those young people, who knows what kind of ideas they might put in your head." The implication hung heavy in the air, a thinly veiled accusation of infidelity. I felt my cheeks flush with anger, but I refused to take the bait. Esther and Rebecca thrived on conflict, and I was determined not to give them the satisfaction. "I appreciate your concern, Rebecca," I said evenly, "but I can assure you my intentions are pure. I'm simply trying to make the most of my retirement years." Her smile faltered for a moment, and I saw a flicker of frustration cross her features. She had expected me to lash out, to play into her twisted narrative, but I had learned to control my emotions, to deny her the drama she so desperately craved. As if on cue, Esther shuffled into the kitchen, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What's going on in here?" she demanded, her gaze darting between us. Rebecca quickly recovered, her mask of concern slipping back into place. I was just asking Lydia about her new job, she said innocently. I'm a little worried about her, that's all. Esther's lips curled into a sneer as she turned her attention to me. A job? At your age? What could you possibly need to work for? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the onslaught. It's just a part-time position at the community center, I explained calmly. It gives me something to do during the day, and a little extra income never hurts. Esther scoffed, her eyes boring into me with contempt. Extra income? Don't be ridiculous. We both know Stephen's gambling has left us in a precarious financial situation. You're up to something, Lydia, and I intend to find out what it is. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips. What was the point? Esther had already made up her mind, and no amount of reasoning would sway her. She was determined to paint me as the villain, the one responsible for the fractures that had torn our family apart. As Esther and Rebecca continued to whisper and speculate, their voices a constant buzz in my ear, I felt a familiar sense of isolation creep over me. Stephen, as always, was nowhere to be found, content to let his mother and wife wage their war of words without him. In that moment, I realized that the only person I could truly rely on was myself. If I wanted to preserve what little dignity I had left, I would have to find a way to rise above the toxicity that had engulfed our home. Leah's voice broke through my thoughts, a welcome reprieve from the chaos. Mom, can we talk for a minute? I nodded gratefully, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the kitchen. As we retreated to the privacy of the living room, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, in my daughter's understanding and support, I would find the strength to weather this storm. I need to tell you something, Mom. Dad's been seeing another woman, Leah blurted out, her eyes brimming with tears. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I stared at my daughter, unable to process what she had just revealed. Stephen, my husband of nearly 4 decades, had been unfaithful. Are you sure? I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Leah nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line. Tom's friend saw them together at a restaurant last week. They were holding hands and acting like a couple. A wave of nausea washed over me as the reality of Stephen's betrayal sank in. All those nights he had claimed to be working late, all the excuses and lies, they had been a smokescreen to cover up his affair. Anger bubbled up inside me, a white-hot fury that threatened to consume me. How could he do this to our family? To me? After everything we had been through, after all the sacrifices I had made to keep our household afloat in the wake of his gambling addiction, this was how he repaid me. That bastard, I hissed, clenching my fists. I'll kill him. Leah's eyes widened, and she reached out to grasp my hand. Mom, please, don't do anything rash. We need to handle this carefully. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my emotions. Leah was right, as much as it pained me to admit it. Confronting Stephen in a blind rage would only give him the upper hand, allowing him to play the victim as he so often did. You're right, I conceded, my voice steadier now. We need to be smart about this. Leah nodded, her expression grim. I'm so sorry, Mom. I know how much this must hurt. I forced a weak smile, touched by her concern. It's not your fault, sweetheart. Your father made his choices, and now he'll have to face the consequences. As Leah left to rejoin her fiancé, I felt a newfound sense of determination coursing through my veins. Stephen had crossed a line, and this time there would be no forgiveness, no second chances. He had shattered the fragile trust that had held our family together, and for that he would pay dearly. I paced the living room, my mind racing with possibilities. I could confront him, demand a divorce, and take him for every penny he had left. Or perhaps a more subtle approach was called for, a slow and methodical dismantling of his life until he was left with nothing but the ashes of his own making. As I mulled over my options, a familiar voice broke through my thoughts. Lydia, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. I turned to find Esther regarding me with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Of course, she would be the last to know about Stephen's indiscretions. Her precious son could do no wrong in her eyes. A wicked smile curved my lips as a plan began to take shape. If Esther wanted to remain blissfully ignorant of her son's failings, so be it. But she would soon learn that her blind loyalty had consequences, and I would be the one to deliver that harsh lesson. "Nothing's wrong, Esther," I replied smoothly. "In fact, everything is about to change for the better." "I'm leaving you, Stephen. I refuse to live in this misery any longer," I declared, thrusting a packed suitcase into his hands. Stephen blinked at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "What are you talking about, Lydia? Where are you going?" "Away from you," I spat, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Away from this toxic household and your constant betrayal." Realization dawned on his face, and he had the decency to look ashamed, if only for a moment. "Leah told you about the affair, didn't she?" I nodded, my jaw clenched. "How could you, Stephen? After everything we've been through, how could you do this to our family?" He shrugged, his eyes cold and devoid of remorse. "It just happened, Lydia. You know how things have been between us lately. I needed someone to make me feel alive again." I recoiled as if he had struck me, his callous words cutting deeper than any physical blow. In that moment, I saw him for what he truly was, a selfish, weak man who had sacrificed his integrity and our marriage on the altar of his own desires. "You disgust me," I hissed, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "Get out of my sight before I do something I'll regret." Stephen opened his mouth as if to protest, but the sound of footsteps in the hallway cut him off. Esther appeared, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her gaze flickering between us. "Lydia, why are you packing Stephen's things?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the inevitable confrontation. "I'm leaving, Esther. Your precious son has been having an affair, and I won't stand for it any longer." Esther's eyes widened, and she turned to Stephen, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Is this true? Have you been unfaithful to your wife?" Stephen shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his mother's piercing gaze. "It's complicated, Mom. Things haven't been right between us for a long time." "That's no excuse," Esther thundered, her face flushed with anger. "How dare you bring such shame upon this family?" I watched the exchange with a sense of grim satisfaction, reveling in the sight of Esther's world crumbling around her. For once, her beloved son was the target of her wrath, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of vindication. As Esther continued to berate Stephen, her words laced with venom, I slipped out of the room, leaving them to their bitter recriminations. It was time for me to start anew, to forge a life free from the toxicity that had plagued me for far too long. With a newfound sense of purpose, I gathered what few belongings I needed and made my way to the front door. As I stepped outside, the warm evening air caressed my face, and I inhaled deeply, savoring the taste of freedom. In that moment, I knew that the road ahead would be far from easy. Esther and Stephen would undoubtedly try to claw their way back into my life, using every manipulation tactic at their disposal. But I was ready for them, my resolve hardened by years of enduring their cruelty. As I walked away from the house that had once been my home, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The invisible chains that had bound me for so long had finally been broken, and I was free to chart my own course, unencumbered by the burdens of the past. "Mom, Grandma can't handle it. She's asking for you," Adam's voice pleaded weakly over the phone. I couldn't help but smile at the irony of the situation. Esther, the woman who had made my life a living hell for so long, was now desperate for my help. The tables had truly turned. "Is she now?" I replied, keeping my tone even. "And why should I come back to that toxic environment?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost picture Adam squirming uncomfortably. "Look, Mom, I know things have been rough, but Grandma is really struggling without you. She can't keep up with the household chores, and Dad is useless." I felt a twinge of satisfaction at the thought of Esther's carefully constructed world crumbling around her. For years, she had lorded over our family, wielding her power like a weapon. Now, she was finally getting a taste of her own medicine. "I'm sorry, Adam, but I can't just come running back at her beck and call," I said firmly. "Your grandmother has made my life miserable for far too long. If she wants my help, she'll have to agree to my terms." Another pause, this one longer. I could sense Adam's hesitation, his loyalty to Esther, warring with his desperation for a solution. "What kind of terms?" he finally asked, his voice tinged with resignation. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. First and foremost, Esther needs to acknowledge her behavior and apologize for the way she's treated me all these years. No more manipulation, no more cruelty. Adam scoffed, and I could picture the skeptical look on his face. You know Grandma, Mom. She'll never admit she was wrong. Then I guess she'll have to learn to fend for herself, I replied, my tone brooking no argument. I'm done being her punching bag. There was a long silence, and for a moment I thought Adam had hung up. But then, his voice crackled through the line once more. Okay, Mom, I'll talk to her and see what I can do, but I can't make any promises. That's all I ask, I said, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The first step had been taken, the gauntlet thrown down. Now it was up to Esther to decide how far she was willing to go to regain my cooperation. As I ended the call, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in my newfound strength. For too long, I had allowed Esther to dictate the terms of my life, to strip me of my dignity and self-worth. But no more. This was my chance to reclaim what was rightfully mine. And I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. Over the next few days, I waited patiently for Adam's response, steeling myself for the inevitable backlash from Esther. She was a proud woman, and admitting her wrongdoing would be a bitter pill to swallow. But as the days turned into weeks and still no word came, I began to realize the true extent of Esther's stubbornness. She would rather suffer in her own misery than swallow her pride and seek my help. It was then that I knew my true revenge had begun. By refusing to play by Esther's rules, by denying her the control she so desperately craved, I was slowly but surely dismantling the very foundation of her power. And as Leah's bond with me grew stronger, her eyes opening to the truth of her grandmother's manipulations, I knew that my victory was all but assured. The tide had turned, and Esther's reign of terror was coming to an end, one painful step at a time. I've decided to live with Mom. She needs me, and I need her, Leah announced, her voice resolute as she began packing her belongings. I watched in stunned silence as my daughter methodically sorted through her things, separating the essentials from the clutter that had accumulated over the years. Her movements were purposeful, her expression one of steely determination. Are you sure about this, sweetheart? I asked, unable to keep the tremor of hope from my voice. Your grandmother won't make it easy for you. Leah paused, her gaze meeting mine with a newfound strength that took my breath away. I'm sure, Mom. After everything that's happened, I can't stay in that toxic environment any longer. It's time I stood up for myself. And for you. A lump formed in my throat as I pulled her into a fierce embrace, overwhelmed by a surge of pride and love. My daughter, once so conflicted and torn by the family drama, had finally found her voice, her inner strength. As we held each other, I couldn't help but think back to the dark days when Esther's grip on our lives had seemed unbreakable. Her manipulation had seeped into every corner of our existence, poisoning our relationships and robbing us of our dignity. But now the tide had turned. With Leah by my side, a united front against the forces that had sought to tear us apart, I felt a renewed sense of hope blossoming within me. Over the next few days, we settled into our new living arrangement, creating a sanctuary of peace and love in the midst of the chaos that had once consumed us. Leah's presence was a balm to my weary soul, a reminder that even in the darkest of times there was light to be found. And as we spent more time together, sharing our stories and supporting one another, I began to see the cracks forming in Esther's carefully constructed facade. Her hold on Adam, once so ironclad, was slowly but surely loosening. It started with small things, a missed phone call, a canceled dinner plan. But soon, the signs became more pronounced. Adam would show up at our door, his expression one of bewilderment and uncertainty, as if he were finally seeing the truth that had been hidden from him for so long. Mom, Grandma is different, he confided in me one evening, his brow furrowed in confusion. She's not the same person I thought she was. I nodded, understanding dawning in my heart. Esther's power had always been rooted in her ability to manipulate, to twist the truth to suit her own agenda. But with Leah and me standing firm, refusing to play her games, that power was slowly slipping away. As the weeks passed, the distance between Adam and his grandmother grew wider, a chasm of disillusionment that even Rebecca's subtle machinations couldn't bridge. And with each passing day, Stephen's life seemed to unravel further. His once proud demeanor crumbling under the weight of his own failures. It was a bittersweet victory, to be sure. Part of me still loved the man I had once pledged my life to, the father of my children. But his actions had set in motion a chain of events that had nearly destroyed us all, and for that there could be no forgiveness. As I watched Leah blossom in our newfound sanctuary, her smile radiant and her spirit soaring, I knew that I had made the right choice. Our family had been fractured, broken by the toxic influences that had wormed their way into our lives. But now we were on the path to healing, to reclaiming the love and respect that had once bound us together. And as for Esther and Stephen, their fate was sealed. They had sown the seeds of their own destruction, and now they would reap the bitter harvest of their actions. For in the end, love and truth would always triumph over manipulation and deceit.